The dangerous truth. Why Nietzsche's philosophy threatens everything you've been taught. Marcus closed his philosophy textbook with trembling hands. For weeks, he had been reading Nietzsche in secret, hiding the books from his family, his professors, even his closest friends. What he discovered within those pages wasn't just challenging academic theory, it was intellectual dynamite that threatened to explode every comfortable assumption he had ever held about morality, meaning, and the very foundation of modern society. As he sat alone in his dorm room at 3 in the morning, Marcus realized why his philosophy professor had glossed over Nietzsche so quickly, why his parents had warned him against dangerous ideas, and why the most transformative philosopher in human history remained largely misunderstood and feared by the very institutions that claimed to value truth and intellectual courage. Nietzsche's philosophy isn't just another academic subject to be studied and debated in comfortable university settings. It's a weapon of intellectual liberation that has the power to shatter the psychological chains that keep millions of people trapped in systems of control, dependency, and unconscious servitude. The German philosopher didn't write to create another school of thought. He wrote to destroy the mental prisons that prevent human beings from realizing their authentic power and potential. The most dangerous aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy is that it reveals the artificial nature of the moral and social structures that most people accept without question. When Marcus read Beyond Good and Evil, he began to understand that the values he had been taught to revere, obedience, conformity, self-sacrifice for abstract ideals, weren't universal truths, but carefully constructed systems designed to maintain existing power hierarchies. Nietzsche's insight that there are no moral phenomena, only moral interpretations of phenomena, doesn't just challenge specific beliefs, it demolishes the entire framework that allows others to define what you should think, feel, and value. Have you ever questioned whether the moral rules you follow actually serve your authentic development, or whether they might be designed to keep you compliant and controllable? The institutions that shape modern thinking, universities, media, political systems, even many religious organizations, have every reason to fear Nietzsche's philosophy because it teaches individuals to become the authors of their own values rather than passive recipients of inherited beliefs. Marcus discovered that Nietzsche's concept of master morality versus slave morality wasn't about dominating others, but about freeing yourself from psychological domination by external authorities who claim the right to determine your worth, purpose, and potential. Slave morality, as Nietzsche identified it, operates through guilt, shame, and the promise of reward for obedience. It teaches people to derive their sense of value from external approval, to suppress their authentic desires in favor of socially acceptable behaviors, and to find meaning through serving systems that may not serve their actual development. Master. Morality, by contrast, involves creating your own values based on your authentic nature, taking responsibility for your choices and their consequences, and refusing to allow others to define your potential or limit your growth. Marcus realized that everything he had been taught about success, morality, and meaning had elements of slave morality designed to make him a productive, compliant member of society, rather than an authentic, self-determining individual. His education had taught him to seek approval from professors rather than pursue genuine understanding. His social conditioning had trained him to value security over growth, comfort over challenge, and fitting in over standing out. Nietzsche's philosophy is particularly threatening because it reveals how modern systems of control operate through what he called the herd instinct, the psychological tendency to seek safety and identity through conformity to group norms. The philosopher understood that most people would rather remain unconsciously controlled than face the anxiety and responsibility that comes with authentic self-determination. This makes them vulnerable to manipulation by anyone who can activate their need for belonging and approval. The weapon-like power of Nietzsche's ideas comes from their ability to break what he called the spirit of gravity, the psychological heaviness that keeps people trapped in limiting beliefs about themselves and their possibilities. When Marcus began applying Nietzschean principles to his own life, he started questioning every assumption he had inherited about what he should do, who he should become, and what constituted a meaningful existence. This questioning process is exactly what makes Nietzsche's philosophy so dangerous to established systems. A person who begins to think independently about values, meaning, and purpose becomes much harder to control through conventional methods of social pressure, guilt, and fear. They stop seeking permission for their choices and start taking responsibility for their own development and direction. Can you think of areas in your life where you're still seeking approval or permission from others instead of trusting your own judgment and taking responsibility for your choices? Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence, the idea that you should live as if you would have to repeat every moment of your life infinitely, serves as a philosophical weapon against mediocrity, self-deception, and unconscious living. Marcus discovered that this thought experiment forced him to examine whether he was living authentically or simply going through the motions of a life designed by others' expectations. The eternal recurrence test reveals how much of our daily existence we spend in activities, relationships, and pursuits that we don't actually value but continue out of habit, obligation, or fear of change. Nietzsche understood that most people live their entire lives without ever becoming conscious of their authentic desires, capabilities, and potential because they're too busy conforming to external standards and expectations. This is why academic institutions often present Nietzsche as a historical curiosity rather than a practical philosopher whose ideas can transform how you approach every aspect of your life. They prefer students who engage with ideas intellectually, without applying them personally, because applied Nietzschean philosophy creates individuals who think for themselves rather than accepting institutional authority without question. Marcus's transformation accelerated when he began practicing what Nietzsche called self-overcoming, the continuous process of transcending your current limitations, assumptions, and comfort zones in service of becoming who you authentically are rather than who others expect you to be. This wasn't about becoming superior to others, but about becoming superior to your previous self through conscious growth and development. The philosopher's famous declaration that God is dead isn't primarily about religion. It's about the death of external authorities that claim the right to determine meaning, purpose, and value for other people. Nietzsche understood that once individuals realize they must create their own meaning rather than inherit it from others, they become psychologically free in ways that threaten any system based on unquestioned obedience and conformity. This is why Nietzsche's philosophy remains controversial and misunderstood more than a century after his death. It's not just another intellectual theory to be debated, it's a practical system for psychological liberation that can transform how you approach relationships, career decisions, creative expression, and personal development. Applied Nietzschean philosophy creates individuals who can't be easily manipulated, controlled, or predicted because they operate from their own authentic values rather than inherited programming. Marcus experienced this transformation firsthand when he stopped seeking his parents' approval for his career choices and started pursuing work that aligned with his authentic interests and capabilities. When he stopped trying to fit in with social groups that didn't reflect his actual values and started building relationships based on genuine connection and mutual growth. When he stopped accepting other people's definitions of success and started creating his own criteria for a meaningful life. Have you ever noticed how much mental and emotional energy you spend trying to meet standards and expectations that you never consciously chose for yourself? The weapon-like power of Nietzsche's philosophy lies not in its ability to attack others, but in its capacity to liberate you from unconscious psychological patterns that limit your authentic development and expression. It's a weapon against the parts of yourself that have been shaped by fear, conformity, and external validation rather than courage, authenticity, and self-determination. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of fate, teaches that psychological freedom comes from embracing responsibility for your choices and their consequences, rather than seeking to blame circumstances, other people, or abstract forces for your situation. This radical acceptance of personal responsibility is terrifying to systems that profit from people's sense of victimhood, helplessness, and dependency. When individuals begin to see themselves as the creators of their own experience, rather than victims of external circumstances, they become much less susceptible to manipulation through fear, guilt, and false promises of security. They start making decisions based on their authentic development rather than seeking safety and approval from others. This transformation explains why Nietzsche's philosophy is often misrepresented as promoting selfishness, aggression, or superiority over others. These misinterpretations serve to discourage people from seriously engaging with ideas that could liberate them from psychological dependency and unconscious conformity. The real danger of Nietzsche's philosophy is not that it makes people cruel or dominating, but that it makes them free. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to explore philosophical ideas that can actually transform your life, rather than just providing intellectual entertainment. Like this video if you believe that true education should liberate your thinking, rather than simply teaching you to conform to existing systems. Share this with someone who's ready to question everything they've been taught about success, morality, and meaning. Marcus's journey with Nietzsche's philosophy taught him that intellectual courage requires more than just reading challenging books. It requires the willingness to apply transformative ideas to your actual life, even when doing so creates conflict with people and systems that prefer you to remain predictable and controllable. The philosopher's weapon isn't designed to attack others, but to liberate you from the unconscious patterns that prevent authentic self-realization. The fear that surrounds Nietzsche's philosophy reveals how much our society depends on people remaining unconscious of their authentic power and potential. Educational institutions, media systems, and cultural authorities often benefit from individuals who seek external validation rather than developing internal authority, who follow prescribed paths rather than creating their own direction, and who accept inherited values rather than developing personal wisdom. Nietzsche's greatest insight was that human beings have the capacity to become conscious creators of their own values, meaning, and purpose, rather than unconscious inheritors of other people's beliefs and expectations. This capability represents the ultimate weapon against any system that requires your unconsciousness, conformity, or dependency for its continuation. The philosopher understood that most people avoid this level of psychological freedom because it requires accepting complete responsibility for your choices, relationships, and direction, without the comfort of external authorities to blame or appeal to for validation. This responsibility can feel overwhelming to individuals who have been conditioned to seek security through conformity rather than growth through authentic self-expression. Marcus discovered that applying Nietzschean principles didn't make his life easier or more comfortable. It made his life more authentic, meaningful, and genuinely satisfying. He learned to create his own standards for success rather than accepting inherited definitions. He developed the capacity to make decisions based on his authentic values rather than seeking approval from others. He began to see challenges and difficulties as opportunities for growth rather than problems to be avoided. The transformation that Nietzsche's philosophy can create in individuals explains why it continues to be feared, misrepresented, and avoided by systems that depend on psychological conformity and dependency. A person who has internalized Nietzschean principles becomes intellectually and emotionally self-sufficient in ways that make them resistant to conventional forms of social control and manipulation. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial or rejecting all forms of cooperation and community. It means choosing relationships, commitments, and involvements based on authentic alignment rather than fear, obligation, or the need for external validation. It means contributing to society from a place of strength and choice rather than weakness and compulsion. Nietzsche's philosophy serves as a weapon against the unconscious patterns that keep people trapped in lives that don't reflect their authentic potential. It reveals the artificial nature of limitations that seem permanent and unchangeable. It provides tools for questioning inherited beliefs and creating personal values based on conscious choice rather than unconscious conditioning. The fear that this philosophy generates in certain institutions and authorities reveals how much they depend on your unconsciousness, conformity, and psychological dependency for their continued influence and control. Nietzsche's weapon is ultimately the weapon of consciousness itself, the capacity to see clearly, think independently, and choose authentically regardless of external pressure to conform or comply. Your own resistance to fully engaging with these ideas may reveal the extent to which you have been conditioned to seek safety through conformity rather than growth through authentic self-expression. The discomfort you feel when contemplating radical responsibility for your own values and choices indicates how revolutionary Nietzsche's philosophy remains more than a century after it was written. The weapon that Nietzsche created isn't designed to harm others. It's designed to liberate you from the unconscious patterns, inherited limitations, and external dependencies that prevent you from realizing your authentic power, potential, and purpose. This liberation threatens any system that requires your unconsciousness for its continuation, which explains why truly transformative philosophy remains dangerous to those who profit from human dependency and conformity.